So today I'll be talking about the power of having a speak-up culture, having environments where employees' voice is welcome, and it's really good for business.
Wow.
What? Okay, red light means we're on. And we're live. We're live. We're live. We're here.
We're here. We're live.
Live from our basements. Hello, LinkedIn universe. So good to have so many of you here. Hello, everyone. Steven Shadletsky here. Delighted to be with you again. Well, hello, Tamsen.
Well, hello, Shed. It was so nice to see so many friendly faces. There's so many faces of people I love. What a great collection of folks.
Yes, our wonderful alumni of these lives. I'm still in my basement. I don't think you're in your basement, though.
I am not. No, I am in it is my home office. And it is like the opposite of a basement because it's up on the 26th floor. So I'm overlooking Boston Harbor as we speak.
Beautiful. I know that view well. And just for all, we might have Tamsen has a beautiful greyhound by the name of Walnut, and it's around Walnut's walking, peeing time.
Yes.
So if you see a little snout, a little cute nose, that's why.
Yes.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm so delighted to be here with Tamsen. And a complete happy accident that today is International Women's Day. And I'm delighted that today is International Women's Day and that we get to have this conversation with you. We were sort of joking that if I had someone on who identified as a man, it'd be like, clong, gang, gong, but we're here. So this is good. And as we both discussed, it's what happens on the other 364 days that is even, if not more important and amazing that we have a day and a month to recognize the importance of diversity and acceptance and inclusion and all the good things that we have to be mindful of in our actions today. So please hop into the comments, say hello, let us know where you're joining us from. We always have at least one or two LinkedIn users, so we'll let you know if you show up as LinkedIn users so that you can let us know which LinkedIn user you are. We also have Alejandro from my team on the ones and twos in the background supporting us in the comment feed as well. So please hop in, say hello, let us know who you are and where you're joining us from. So Tamsen, you and I have page 2 in common.
We do.
And in fact, I was having lunch, I think, or a meal with Jessie Finkelstein, who's one of the co-founders of page 2. And whenever I meet with Jessie, she's always like, you need to meet so-and-so. And it was Tamsen and Nick Morgan.
Oh, yeah.
And so we connected. Steven Shapiro's here.
I know Steven Shapiro. Hey, Steven Shapiro.
Welcome, Steven Shapiro. Maybe we'll have you on very soon, Steven Shapiro, a great innovation leader.
He's working on a new book, so it'd be good.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Noted. Look at that. Happy serendipity. So you and I met, and you have been so generous with your time and your brilliance. I love that you identify as an English to English translator. There are many people that are fluent in English, but yet don't use the language to its most power. And I feel like that is really your specialty. And what you're most fascinated in is how can ideas and words move people to the best of our ability. Is that accurate?
That's accurate because as much as it's our actions oftentimes that indicate more about the idea, like words are the currency of ideas. If we can't put them into words, then we oftentimes lack the ability to make sure that people hear them, understand them, kind of identify them as their own and move forward and get the impact that we're looking for from them.
Yeah, and do something with them.
Yes.
With those ideas. Beautiful. So your first book, it's Find Your Red Thread is your first book, which we'll dive into and talk about the concepts within that book. Love the title and love the concept. And then we'll also talk about you're working on your next book, which is very nascent, not even yet titled. So if by the end of this conversation we come up with the title for Tamsen's book,
so we can have we got a live poll of the three that are in play. Which one's best?
Nice. happening in this live. We will
That's right.
pick Tamsen's the title of her next book. You also have a really interesting background as a receptionist and leader at Weight Watchers.
I do. Yeah.
And Weight Watchers is an example of an organization that has moved people for the better with their use of language and their program. So
I'd like
maybe
to
there's
think
a
so.
connection.
Yep.
Maybe there's a
Yep.
connection there. You've also done a lot of work with TED and TEDx over the
TEDx Cambridge
years.
specifically. Yeah, I
Yeah,
can't
TEDx
claim any
Cambridge.
association with TED other than attending some of their conferences. But yes, I have been the executive producer and idea strategist for TEDx Cambridge now for 9 years. I'm in my 9th year working with them.
Nice. And I'll just say from a personal perspective, you have been hugely helpful for me in, I had the idea, giving a TEDx talk would be cool, and sort of something on the bucket list for me personally. And you have been so helpful in helping me frame how to approach that.
Yeah.
Giving a TEDx talk is very different than giving a talk.
That's very true. Yes. And I love that language of framing because I don't necessarily believe with any kind of idea, and TEDx in particular, of like, how do we position it? Because that to me implies movement of the idea towards some kind of, aim, right? Like, how do I make this idea fit what other people want? And I just generally feel like if we can frame our ideas to show off the best parts and most attractive parts for them, that will actually, ends up being oftentimes an approach that has more integrity to the idea, but also what I found is more inherent power. So yeah, it really is about finding how do we pick and choose the pieces of the idea that are going to be, that when someone looks at it, when they read about it, they're going to say, oh, that is different. That is something that our audiences are going to want. And we haven't heard that before. At least we haven't heard it that way.
And that's the one thing that I've learned as I've digged more into TED and the TEDx community with people like you. Brett Knowles has been really helpful. He's taking part in TEDx Reno, Laura Gassmer-Otting, just a bunch of these conversations that TED and TEDx rewards ideas. It's not about being a good speaker. It's about the quality and the substance of your idea. And often the best speakers have the most compelling ideas, even if they aren't refined or polished, which I really sort of enjoy. It's a great sort of democracy of idea.
Yeah. I mean, I believe that passion trumps polish every time. And that's part of the reason why, because sometimes positioning an idea a certain way can be the enemy of it. Because if you start to push it too far away from yourself so that you think it will be attractive to other people, you actually lose some of your inherent passion for it. So I'm like, we should keep it on you, keep it on the part that you're passionate about, and let's figure out how to get that translated so that other people can see that power the same way you do, rather than let's move its locus of power. Like, we don't need to do that. We just need to figure out how to get someone else to really see through their own lens where the power is.
And I think you just articulated what the power of good marketing is, or effective marketing is as well, because, how often do we consume someone's marketing and it is, it's positioned to get people to buy, but it isn't lived genuinely and inherently from the inside out. And like, imagine if you're a marketing and you put something out and your own employee base scoffs at it.
Right.
Which
that happens a lot.
A lot.
That happens a disturbing amount of time. Yes. This is, you are tapping into, I mean, I'm literally, 20 minutes away from finishing my newsletter post for tomorrow, which is on this very topic about that gap and what my like 25-year battle with branding as a practice has been. Because branding is often trying to capture this aspirational hope of what you wish people thought about what you do. And that can lead to gaps between how you're trying to shape the narrative and then how you actually live the narrative. But as our, hopefully now mutual friend Nick Morgan will tell you, it's essentially the body language of the brand that counts more. That when those two are in opposition, he talks about it in the form of, just an individual speaking. But if your words and your body language don't match, we'll trust the body language before we'll trust the words. And I think at a market level scale, the same thing is true with how we will respond to, again, whether it's an individual brand or it's a company brand. If there's a gap, we're gonna rely on how somebody acts or how the brand actually acts to decide whether or not United has friendly skies or not, just for instance. Just throwing that one out there. Just, I don't know. Just pick that one out of the hat.
Voted #1 airline in your respective region, even though you'd never participated in that survey.
Yes, that's one of those places where my market researcher husband was like, and how large was the sample size on that?
Yeah.
Who exactly was in it? What was the methodology?
Yes. In the past 7 months, we sampled people who had the last name that started with U, and they all agreed. So speaking of TEDx talks, Steven Shapiro has a brilliant one that he gave, I think, TEDx NASA, but like a 5-6 minute
NASA or NASA, as in
NASA, NASA.
Oh, then he must have worked with Haley Foster, who is an amazing woman who's been involved with TEDx NASA from the get-go. And she and I just had this opportunity. We had the National Speakers Association Winter Conference this past weekend, and Haley and I, we had a great, it was lovely to speak with somebody who has been doing this. I mean, she's been doing it longer than I have. But she and I, we have a kind of, I would say, an overlapping ethos about like why we do what we do and why we do it a particular way.
Yes. TEDx NASA.
Yes.
Not Nassau. I don't know if there
Bahamas.
is a TEDx Nassau.
Just as likely to be one in Nassau as there is in NASA. So
yeah, certainly warmer. Unless, anyway, different conversation. Casey Shendelman, who's a great marketing professional leader. Hello, Casey. My friend Jason Schottner's here. Hello, Benjamin and NYC. Keep it coming in the comments here. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about today. What do you want to talk about now? We could definitely talk about find your thread. Find your red thread, and sort of what led you to that. Like, where do you want to go here next? Choose your own adventure.
Choose my own adventure. Gosh. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that building on where we just were with this kind of gap between the lived brand and the shaped one, that gets a little bit of the territory of the new book, but they are related. So, so that let me externally process a bit, and then we'll figure out where we end up. Because so the red thread,
someone's in charge here.
Something. So the red thread of Find Your Red Thread, the way that I define that is the story that we tell ourselves about why things happen the way they do. Our brains do this. Does it preconsciously, unconsciously, but every decision has a story behind it. And even more importantly, it has a story we believe behind it. Again, a lot of times we're not even clear about what that is, but we have to be able eventually, oftentimes, particularly in business, explain our decision to somebody else. And so Find Your Red Thread is really about the idea of, like, instead of trying to tell our story our way, which means that our audiences have to convert and have to find their own story and rationale within it. The book is really about what would happen if you framed your idea, your story, in the way that your audience would. In other words, how can we build the story they will tell themselves about your idea? So when they get that point of rationalization or having to explain it to somebody else, we've essentially supplied what is already a comfortable set of languages, comfortable set of concepts in comfortable language for them in a way that allows them to understand and identify with that idea. And I think when we're talking about that gap between the lived narrative and the shaped one,
I often call
understanding it's actually how we live.
Gap.
Exactly. To go to Ron Tight, bringing that all in, that gap in the say do. Yeah, exactly that gap. It is a gap between the story that we wish we were telling, right, and the story that people actually end up telling themselves. And so, I just got, the more that I was working with my own idea and more that I was working with it, was really interested in, okay, but why? Like, what makes that work? What makes a story work for other people? And that's kind of where I started to say, well, what's underneath story? And that's where we're going now.
Cool. And what's sort of like a quintessential or the best example you have of this, either working or not working, or both?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the inspiration for where I'm trying to go with a new book is this kind of the shortest stories of all, right? And we've got some really famous examples. So, in the entertainment world, you've got the movie Alien, which was sold as Jaws in space. And so I find that fascinating, and you take that and you combine something like Reese's peanut butter cups, chocolate peanut butter, two great tastes that taste great together. When you look at how Steve Jobs originally sold the iPod, like the famous line that he said, it's 1,000 songs in your pocket. It's this combination of two familiar things combined in an uncommon way that create a new uncommon thing. So, the very layperson view of the thesis of this new book is that if you're trying to sell an uncommon idea, you need to start with common ground. And then there's specificity from there, but it's this idea of the discipline of taking any idea down to its two core elements, which represent two core principles that I am discovering as I'm testing this and researching this, that turns out to be really a very powerful and very doable way to get people both to understand your idea and to identify with it, which are the two criteria that you need to get someone to invest in it, both literally and figuratively.
Yeah. Whether investor or purchase or share with a friend or whatever that support looks like.
Yeah. And do that long term. I mean, one of the things we were talking about earlier is like, you can get, there's all sorts of ways to get somebody to do something, to drive action in a moment. But you mentioned my years moonlighting at Weight Watchers. I mean, that instilled in me from a very early age, frankly, that I'm not satisfied with a one-time shift. I mean, because you can't help someone get to their health goals if they're not able to sustain actions over time. And so I've been deeply interested in how do we do that? Because, the sustaining actions over time hasn't really been the focus of marketing, which has also been my background for 25 years. And so, trying to figure out how can we talk about our ideas, again, whether that's a product, an offering, a brand, or as, from a thought leadership idea, how do we do that in a way that lasts for the long term? And, all signs point to someone has to feel completely aligned with something. Why are they doing it? Why are they doing it that way? Both elements have to be aligned in order for someone to do it long term. Yeah. So, Simon's work obviously on Start With Why is important, because you have to align on why are we doing this? Like, if you don't care what this is all about, then this is not going to happen. This is not going to matter. If you don't actually need what we do, this is not going to matter. And what I'm really interested in is you also have to be aligned on how you do what you do, the way that you do it. Why do you do it in that particular way? Because if you don't agree on that, you're never going to have that long-term alignment that you need. And a lot of people don't even know that. So this is what this book is really about like saying, hey, you are operating on this way, but you are operating on the basis of beliefs and rules that you're not even aware of. And because you're not aware of, that's where a lot of these problems of buy-in and misaligned branding are coming from.
Yeah. I'm thinking, as well as you speak of this, one of the examples that Simon uses in Start With Why is of TiVo. So TiVo, first mover, apparently really good technology, but they totally missed on their branding because they attempted to talk about a new thing as opposed to using an old frame of reference somehow to, or identifying on people's principles. Yes. Right.
Yes.
So they said, we have a new product. It pauses live TV. It memorizes your, there's an algorithm
feature.
Yep. Studies your watching habits and recommends shows to you. It can record so that you can watch it when you want. And the cynical majority were freaked out by this new technology. Right. It can do what? Right?
Yeah.
Versus, and this is a Simon example. He says, if you're the type of person that likes to have complete control of their entire lives, we have a product for you.
Yeah.
So he's at least trying to tap into a belief or a principle.
Yes. And agree. Yeah. I mean, that's right. And because any component of a product, if we're talking about a product, like this is what I find over and over again, as I'm working with my clients on this, like when pressed, they actually can get their idea down to the two most important elements of it. They can get the product down to okay, if we took this piece out, would your product still be the product? And they're like, nope. I'm like, all right. So now we know what these load bearing things are. And each of those two core elements, whether it's an idea or a product, are tied to principles. So kind of that's what's actually been really very like exciting to me about doing this and really starting to like hash it out, is that you can kind of start from either perspective. You can either have that like we've got these principles and here's how they show up in our idea, or here's how they show up in our product, or you can reconstruct backwards from the idea or the product. Why did you do it that way? Why? Okay, it's got this. Why that? Right? Not how that, but why that thing? Why is that thing? And so what's interesting is kind of a great contrast to the TiVo example. And I don't know if Simon talked about this or not, to me is the Sonos example, because Sonos was trying to do something very similar, right? It's a whole new thing, but their original branding was any song, any room, not, wireless Wi-Fi with, some of that was in there, but what they led with was any song, any room. And again, we're not talking about the technical pieces there. We're talking about concepts that individually are understandable and individually, in this case, attractive, and then together, super understandable, super attractive. And that's useful. Again, there's all this is framed in the context. This does not matter to the people who get no visceral reaction from music, and those people exist. But people who are like just literally don't like to listen to music. But for those who did, it had a very similar, I think, appeal to 1,000 Songs in Your Pocket. Any song, any room kind of takes that idea and expands upon it without saying, we're the Uber of, right? Which is also useful. And whenever a company does that, they're essentially leveraging the same thing.
Yeah.
The challenge is when you say something like the Uber of something, you're like, well, which element of Uber are you talking about? Are you talking about the shady black hat practices where you're trying to suppress, your competitor's business? Or are you talking about the disruptor to the marketplace? Are you talking about, a mobile device? So this is why, to me, like, yes, have your stories. Yes, have your metaphors, but know what they stand for. What's the principle behind it? Just so you could be crystal clear that you know what it is, so that your audience knows what it is.
But that Sonos example is so good. It's 4 words.
Yeah.
Right. With 2 punctuation marks.
Yeah.
And you just like, got it.
Right.
And either you're like, cool, I want that, or you're like, that doesn't interest me. But that's the point of effective marketing. It either attracts or repels.
And to me, it's important, like, and I've spent much of my life at the intersection of marketing and sales, or in the nonprofit world, marketing and fundraising. And this to me is where this is where the handoff goes bad, right? And because it's if I can get it down to 4 words, 2 concepts, whatever, and someone goes, I want that, I'm interested, or I'm not. That's a point at which, like, if those are the principles upon which your thing is actually based, that's a really good point to say, if someone's not interested, stop spending your time there, right? Stop trying to market, stop trying to sell to people who fundamentally, like, if they don't like music, doesn't matter, right? Fine. Like, and if you're not looking for a tech product, like, it doesn't matter how much you love Apple's innovation. If you don't need a phone right now, if you don't need a computer, doesn't matter, right? Yeah. So to me, that's really important from that, helping to understand, and it allows for there to be not just kind of this form of outside motivation that actually is as powerful as intrinsic motivation. But then once you get somebody interested in it, like, because they are like, oh, I want that, then they determine whether or not they want to know more. Because somebody would just be like, I'm in. Early adopters, somebody like, they're just like, I'll get it. I don't care how it works. Just let me figure it out. And then, the further along somebody is on that kind of idea, I know it's a technology adoption curve, but frankly, I think it's an idea adoption curve. Yeah. The later that somebody gets on that, oftentimes the more, like, they're going to want that detail that helps determine.
Yeah. Nice. Very cool. Please keep the comments and questions coming in the chat here. This was a quote that you said earlier, Tamsen, that was brilliant. Passion trumps polish. So good, so true. Thank you for that, Casey. But yeah, keep any questions that you have in this conversation for Tamsen, keep them coming, and comments as well. So where are you in the process of second book now? So I know you're discussing title, what is clear, what is not clear, what have you written, like where are you in that process?
So my current struggle, the current hellscape in which I find myself in the book writing process is actually the flow of chapters that I am finding to be, I think I finally unlocked it, like unlocked at least the starting point. But what I was discovering in this process, and maybe you fall into one of these camps, but clearly there's a couple different camps, like of how people go about organizing information for a book. One is the camp of people that has a whole bunch of stuff that they've gathered together, like stories, concepts, all of this stuff. And then the process of figuring out the book is just like, what's the sequence for this stuff?
Mm-hmm.
That is not how my brain works. My brain works more from like, what does someone need to know? And that will tell me what stuff I need to put in. I mean, yeah, I've got all that stuff, but I'm not putting it on the table first because I don't have to clean the table back off. I am like, if I have a principle I live my life by, it's that a stitch in time saves 9. So I'm like, I don't want to put something in that I'm going to eventually
a stitch in time save what was
saves
that?
9. Yeah, kind of a classic proverb. Stitch in time saves 9. In other words, what's one thing I can do now that's going to save me a lot more work later?
Yeah,
it's also
and your reader too.
Yeah, exactly. It's also the conservation of energy. Well, right, like, so it has many backgrounds, but that was so it took a while before I realized that was the challenge, because my editor kept saying, well, how do you want to organize it? Are these the right chapters? And I'm like, I don't know if they're the right chapters, because I don't know, like, what's the flow. But I think I unlocked earlier this week that, once people just hear what the basic thesis of the book is, that the next big question that they would want to have answered is, why can't I get the buy-in I need right now? Why is it so hard?
Nice.
So that we can, because I'm not someone who stylistically likes to say everything you're doing is wrong, because I believe from a messaging standpoint that the more that we can validate people's own need to be seen as smart, capable, and good, the more likely they're going to be receptive to information.
That we're with them, we're rooting for them. Yeah,
exactly. So that's where I was like, oh, because I went back and say, well, where did I start with this? What was my frustration with this? I was just like, yeah, my question was, why is this so hard? Like, why can't I where am I going wrong? And that turns out to really, I think, be a rich place to go from there, because there's really two key places where we lose the buy-in game. And one is people just don't understand what it is that we're talking about. And this is where the 2 principles and the conclusion come in. That common ground piece comes in. And the second piece is alignment. Oh, they understand it. They just don't agree with it. And they're not, we've just we're just fishing in the wrong pond with it. Mm-hmm. And as it turns out, when you're trying to solve for both of those, that's where this idea, the underlying principles that we all use to kind of guide our belief systems, really affect both of those things. So if you can get something down to its core principle, you can get something down to, like, what is that element that it represents, then you can essentially speed up and short circuit that otherwise we're like wandering in the field of story for a long time, which is a fine field, except that a lot of times we tell a story and we think it is communicating one message or principle, and somebody's walking away with a very, very different one. So it's all of that.
Or they're stuck in story and wondering, where am I being taken right now, other than being mildly entertained or not.
Yeah, I mean, annoyed. I think that the mental model that I hope, like, one of the mental models that I hope people walk away with here is that, we just act like Aesop, right? Every story needs a moral. Like, you actually need to explain it, particularly if you're trying to get buy-in, if you're trying to motivate people, if you're trying to, get adoption of an idea. Every story needs a moral. You must explain the point of the story that you're telling, so that A, there's no confusion. B, that you're sure that you actually know what the heck you're doing. And then C, that you've got that alignment. Not only is the story aligned with the point that you're trying to make, a huge mistake that a lot of speakers do. Like, let me just toss in the story, but it actually has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Yeah. Or more importantly, that the point that you're telling the story, like that you're really clear that somebody's walking away with that same idea, right? That they've both got that perspective on it.
Yeah.
The same perspective. You have the same perspective on it.
Nice. Very good. And And yeah, if there's A, no moral to the story, and B, if the moral doesn't connect to the idea you're trying to prove, the story it's not the right story, at least for that spot.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, because the way that I think about this is that and this is the kind of one of the main principles of the first book was that every decision has a story, right? So that and so every idea has a story. So our decision to come up with a new product or a new approach to something has a story behind it. A relationship between cause and effect about why that thing was the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the one thing. And then, but underneath the story, right? So like long-standing truism of stories, that a story is an argument. And so I started to say, okay, what does that actually mean? And so A, what do we mean by argument? And B, an argument for what? Right. And this is what started to be really interesting. And so to me, and what that is that if a story is an argument, and the simplest, strongest argument is, I'm going to wonk out here for a minute, what's known as a syllogism, but it's basically two premises and a conclusion. Now you know why two elements into a new thing is the simplest, strongest way you can identify something, because it is literally an argument. But second, if we're saying it's two premises and conclusion, that means it's principle, conclusion, which means if you're really
is it kind of like if this, then and this, or then, okay.
Yeah. Nice. So all dogs are animals, right? That animal is a dog. Therefore, that dog is an animal. Like that's, like your super basic syllogism. But if you're basically saying, if you're if you're a music lover, right? And having your whole music library is a way to support your love of music, and being able to take it with you, like in your pocket, is a way to, pocket size is appealing to you. Well, then when you put those two things together, well, now you've got that. So this book is about kind of the next level down, basically saying, yes, we need the stories that help us explain, understand, bring ideas to life in the course of case studies or whatever. But we also need the principles underneath them. Because if the story isn't working, it's usually because something is missing or misaligned at the principle level. And so this is really what, that's really kind of like from a big model standpoint where the book is going. But it also, once I had that realization, it helped me understand why there was so much frustration with why both storytelling information, like advice that's out there, has been helpful, because we need that story to help explain the idea, but also why sometimes we get stuck in stories, that we're doing it and it's not working and we don't know why. And that's because they're an argument, and they're literally an argument for something about doing a certain thing a certain way. They're an argument for, if you do this, this will happen, or because we did this, this happened. That if you don't understand what you're arguing for, or the elements of that argument, and if the argument is missing something, or if the people that you're talking to don't agree those things are true, well, then your idea, no matter how good the story is, long term, it's going to fail, because what it's built on isn't strong enough. The foundation of it isn't strong enough. So that's nice. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I know this is like still a little fuzzy, but this is where I am with the book right now. It's like, great. These are the ideas, and trying to figure out how do we sequence them.
Beautiful. And we have a couple questions here that I'll point to. Just what I'm hearing. So one is, what's the type of book you're writing? Because some books are intended, like the book I've written, Speak Up Culture, it's intended to be read from beginning to end.
Yeah.
There are other books, like Bono came out with a book with 40 short stories. You can pick up that book and just read any short story you want, which is how it was designed.
Yeah.
So one, I think, is what type of book you're writing.
Okay.
I think is an interesting sort of thing that I think then can dictate the format that it flows into. And the other thing that I heard you point to is like the Nancy Duarte, give them a vision of what could be, and then tell them what's getting in the way from not doing that.
Yeah.
It's sort of a nice oscillation, and talk about a brilliant TED talk in Nancy Duarte's. But that's just a couple of things that came to mind in reflection as you were sharing there.
Yeah. The quick answer to the type of book is,
And there are many types of books.
Yeah, it's probably going to be as meta as Find Your Red Thread ended up being, because if you suggest to people that here's a format for presenting information, then your book, in my mind, damn well better follow that structure. So Find Your Red Thread had a red thread for the whole book, and then every chapter had a red thread. And so, and there's elements to the red thread. So every chapter had to have one of those elements. And I did what I could in the book to make that transparent. So every chapter starts with the red thread of that chapter, that kind of thing.
Nice.
This book in a very similar way.
That's a great accountability for writing as well. You're being so explicit. It's a nice sort of, it's a public accountability to your reader of like, I'm trying to do the thing. How am I doing the thing?
Yeah.
Which is really interesting.
I think kind of, and at least as a kind of chapter level, I think I am going to follow that idea story principle concept for every chapter. Like, here's the question answer of this chapter. Why is buy-in so hard? Right? Because we're kind of focused at the wrong end of the stick. All right, let me tell you a story. All right, let's unpack the principles behind that. Like, you got the principle of the whole story, but let's unpack why those things are the case and like how they just came to life and the thing that I talked about. And then, all right, how do you apply that to your own stuff? As far as the overall structure of the book, it probably is a book that I'd like it to design it in such a way that, like, almost like a newspaper article, that you can stop reading it at the point you've gotten enough information to feel like you can implement it. So again, it could be, my editor at Page 2 and I, Kendra Ward, she's amazing. We've talked about whether or not we could do a one-page version of the book, like a principles only version of the book, right? And then there's like the traditional, business book kind of thing that follows, like the story that opens the chapter, and like, so that people can see that the whole thing, like that it works the same way. Because one of the free, to quote Seth Godin, one of the free prizes of approaching framing ideas this way is that you end up with stories that scale, which is a real problem for a lot of organizations. They have a story that works in one situation, or they have a story that works with one kind of client. Like, anytime you've tried to say, here's what I did in this industry, and then somebody from a different industry goes, yeah, but what's your experience in art industry? And you're like, dude, it's the same problem. When you get something down to the principle level, right, you're able to tell both in length and in breadth stories of any like of all scales, right? So I should be able to, like I did with my first book, summarize the entire idea in a sentence. I should be able to do that if I've got or you should be able to articulate your product in a sentence. 1,000 songs in your pocket, Jaws in space. And it should be able to extend to movie length. Like, you should be able to do the whole thing. And the thing is, like, if it's all built on the same foundation, it should all work. And so that's the other thing I'm trying to get to, is just say, is there something we could do with actually the format of the book itself that illustrates that story that scales kind of idea?
That's really neat. And then that's really neat. So essentially, can you get it to its bare bones such that the chapters are, chapter 3 is any song, any room. And like, it flows, as an example. That's
really cool. Got it. Right. And so and because I know sometimes all you have to do is give people the principles and the argument, and they're like, yep, I got it. Right. And then there are people, and this goes to learning design and theory, that actually need the examples in order to understand. Yeah. So the one thing I want to make clear with all of this, when I do this work, is saying, I am not saying we should skip story. We need story. We just need to make sure that we don't stop at story. We have to keep going to what is the story built on. And we have to pair the story with the principles in order, like, if we really want to make sure it's super clear and super alignable, then we need both, right? You need both to articulate both the principles and the story, or give someone a story they can tell themselves about it, so that they really understand, they can really experience it for themselves.
Beautiful. Love it. And double click love to Kendra Ward, who I worked with closely on Speak Up Culture as well. She is amazing. I describe her as the guardian angel of my book. So maybe
well, she was my editor the first time around, so I was like, please give me Kendra again.
Yeah. Nice. Here is a brilliant and well-timed question from Mr. Steven Shapiro. I'm in the process of writing my next book. First draft is done. Congrats. And we know, giddy up. pumped to dig into that one, Stephen. And I know it will be different than your other books. What is one suggestion you have for using the red thread concept for reviewing and editing a book? Boom. Mic drop. Go.
So the red thread is as much a construction tool as it is a diagnostic tool. So the high level answer to that, what I'd say, I would use it as a diagnosis for where you can strengthen what's missing. Here's my story to support that. So I live in Boston, as you know, and maybe there's areas of Toronto that are like this as well, where there's some very, very old buildings in Boston. Like Boston was founded in 1630, and we've got buildings that are hundreds of years old. After a while, these brick buildings start to buckle a little bit. And so usually at some point in the past, there's been what they'll do is they'll insert what's known as a tie rod through the building. So this kind of steel or iron bar, literally, that is put through the building, and it's capped on either end, usually with something decorative. So if you ever walk around Boston or an old city and you see these like metal stars kind of randomly on the side of a building, those are indicating where a tie rod has been put through. They're there to make sure that it's as strong and as stable as possible. I see the red thread like that, right? That you can go through once you've got a piece of content, whether it's a book or a blog post or whatever, and go through and make sure that all the pieces are in there. So that's what I would do as I was reviewing a book, is to say, is the question that the audience needs to have answered, is that clear? Is it clearly articulated that there's something that in essence says, you have this question, I have the answer, right? Does it include the real problem that your approach solves that's actually getting in the way of that answer, right? So that question that people have, like, we need that in a book, because that's where they're going to pick it up. They're like, I have trouble getting buy-in, or I have trouble getting this. They are not searching for the thing they don't know they have yet, right? But we have to tell them that. So we need that goal question. We need that real problem that's getting in the way. I am a huge fan of making sure there's something in there that creates a moment of truth. I have a whole entire keynote on this topic. I'm so passionate about how we leave this piece out so often. So much about marketing and sales is about problem solution, except that in every story, including the ones that we tell ourselves, that before we'll do a new solution, there's what's known as a moment of truth, where there is some additional piece of information, some additional insight that we come across or discover or learn that makes us realize that if we want what we want, and if this thing is true, then we have to do something differently than we've been doing before. So that's the next thing I would look for. Is there a clear kind of like something that they can't unhear kind of insight that makes them go, oh my gosh, given everything that you've told me, if I truly want the answer to this question, and I truly want to solve this thing, then I have got to do, I need something that does this, so that your answer, which is what I call the change, you're like, this does that. And so making sure that that's there, and then you've given people a way to look at it. So that's how I would use it to review and edit, and make sure that those things are clear. Yes, you can make sure that every chapter has that as well, by the way. But at the very least, making sure that particularly in your chapter 1 or your introduction, where you're essentially arguing, like you're giving the thesis for the book and you're kind of making your high level argument for it, that all those pieces are in it.
Nice. And I think, I've heard, I don't want to say nightmare stories, but I've heard authors say that editing a book is so hard because especially when you're working with an objective editor who's saying, like, this story doesn't fit. But you're like, I love that story. But when you can go to a level higher and be objective with what's the red thread overall, what is the red thread of this chapter? What is it allows you to discern and be a lot more objective and saying, that is a great story, but it might be better served as an article and not here.
Right.
And it allows you to be a surgeon with the book and sort of be more objective with it.
Yeah. And I mean, this gets back to, it tells you what absolutely does and does not need to be there. And to that gets us back to that principle conversation. Because if you understand, what's the question, what's the answer, right? That's the goal, that's the goal, the audience question, and the change is the change is your answer. It's essentially your approach, and those two things together, your idea, right? That the best way to do X is Y. Then those two things that you're passing through, that real problem and that moment of truth, those are actually what surface those two principles I was talking about. And so what can happen is, if you can really identify yourself, all right, here's the real problem that's getting in the way. And you can identify, here's why that's such a problem, right? Then, right, you can, and you've got the other principle, then you can either argue for or against any story that you've included, or right, because you can say, does it actually move this? Does it teach this principle? If it doesn't, find a different story. Like it's right. And then second, it allows you to go, what's missing? What do I need? I've got this principle, but I don't have anything else to support it. I don't have any stories. I don't have anything else to support it. So it's just to use an example we were talking about before, if someone's trying to build a better brand, right? That's the question. That's a thing that people are like, how do I make a better brand? How can I improve my personal brand? How can I improve my business brand? One of the ways to frame from a real problem standpoint along the lines we were talking about before is whether or not you are trying to shape the narrative or whether you're trying to live the narrative, that there's actually a tension between those two, right? That there's what you say it is based on your words, but then there's actually what you're doing that's mattered. No, the principle behind that problem is that actions speak louder than words. Like that's the kind of proverb version of it. And then second, right, the second principle, the thing that creates that moment of truth could be something like it's our beliefs that drive behavior, right? Or it's the principles that set the pattern, which means if you really want to build a better brand, you need to not just focus on what your words are, but what your actions are. And more than that, you've got to excavate the beliefs that are driving your behaviors, right? So it's not like come up with better stuff to say, it's have a better understanding of why you do what you do. And if you can talk about that and build your brand on that, then you're going to solve that tension between shaping the brand and living the brand. So that's really what that's all of it. That's both the red thread and this kind of new thing. Doesn't have a name that we're putting together.
We just named it the new thing.
The new thing. Yeah.
I mean,
right now it's like, I'm trying to, what I'd love for this to be is this, I would love for it to be one of those things that people include in the things that they feel like they must have, right? So people have got their mission, vision, values. And I think that they really need to understand what's their belief system. Like you need to understand your kind of your portfolio of principles, right? That are driving everything that you do. Yeah. And again, it's not aspirational. It's actually you're reconstructing based on what you've already got. And that's what you could obviously tell. I'm a little passionate about it right now. So.
but it's this notion of any song, any room. Like
any song, any room. Yeah.
What is that for the organization? What is that per product or service?
You got it.
That's really cool.
And why any song, any room, right? So the any song, any room is how you make sure you get the explanation part. The attachment piece, like, to get someone to the point where they're attached, aligned with the brand, identifying with the brand, like doing this thing long term, that relies on the principles behind any song, any room. Yeah. Why
or
any
underneath
song?
Of.
Exactly. Why any song? Why any room? And what's powerful when we're talking about businesses and concepts is once you understand that, now you've got a non-feature or benefit explanation for why you are using a particular technology, a particular approach, right? We believe any song. Why? Okay, so that's why we are using this kind of technology, right? Maybe it's MP3s or whatever. We believe in any room. Why? That's why it's wireless, right? So instead of like leading with it's wireless and it's MP3s where people are like, I don't know that. It's kind of the TiVo example. Like, why would I care? I'm kind of scared of that. I don't know what it is. You're able to say, because we believe this, right? You're going to get this. Here's how, right? So I haven't yet figured out where I think it's a sister model to Simon's Golden Circle. But it is, I think that they're incredibly complementary because I don't think you can do any of this if you don't have the alignment on why. But we also have to have the alignment on how too.
Nice. Okay, we are beginning to land this plane. We have one more great question that came in from, and I knew it would happen, LinkedIn user. So please feel free to let us know who you are in the comments so we can see. Do you think these ideas apply also to relationships, not only marketing? I hear people in corporations, business who wish to speak for themselves or for an initiative using the language or story that their boss or investors use, the familiar framework, and still stay authentic to themselves. Short answer, yes.
Yes, it's a heck yes. Yes. I know it's a family show or else I'd say it even more strongly. That's the power. That's the
It isn't a
power.
family show.
That's the power of principles, right? Because if you get something down to a principle level where someone goes, yep, I understand the principle, then you allow them to restate it in their own way, right? As long as they're not taking off the principle. Because, like, think about it this way: there's slow and steady wins the race versus early bird gets the worm. Those are two opposing principles, right? Or as I like to say, look, I already mentioned earlier that one of my guiding principles is a stitch in time saves 9. One of the guiding principles of my husband is the second mouse gets the cheese. So you can see how at certain times those would be opposite. One of the things that's interesting about principles is they're situational, right? So that's important to understand, because there's sometimes when the early bird gets the worm, and sometimes it's slow and steady that's going to win the race. What's important to understand is that once you've got the fact that actions speak louder than words, or a stitch in time saves 9, and everybody's in agreement on that, right? That's a big if, I know. But once you've got that, then someone who isn't the person who originally framed it can go and say, well, I like to think about it this way. So I even did it kind of unintentionally earlier when I said a stitch in time saves 9. I'm like, it's also, by the way, the conservation of energy law principle. In other words, I'm going to do the work sometime. I would just rather do it up front than later. Like, that's how I would explain it. So this idea of principles, yes, this book is written for leaders of either their own movements or their own organizations, who are struggling, who want to get to that impact faster, but struggling to get the buy-in that they know they need. And yet, yeah, absolutely. Like, my dream for all of this is that if we could get to that point of really talking about principles, if we could talk about the principle level, if we can connect on the principle level, we start to connect with not only what connects us to uncommon or new ideas, but we get to a point of what actually connects us to each other. And that, I think, is something that we could all use a lot more of.
I agree there for sure. Tamsen, anything else that we've yet to discuss, or you wanted to share that we haven't yet before we say ta-ta for now?
I think the only other thing I would do, just to add, just to tie the loop in, is, this is why, for those of us who either work in the TEDx world or have given a TEDx talk or something along those lines, or do what I like to call compact keynotes or compact content. In other words, things that are short. It's very hard to do this without understanding the underlying principles behind something, right? Yeah. And so it's part of one of the reasons why I do encourage people to, attempt something at TEDx length or short, again, compact keynote or whatever, because it teaches you experientially how to really narrow something down to what it's really about, so that people can determine whether or not they really want to get on board with it. And so this is, I'm just a huge fan of that. So I continue to bring us all the way back to where we started. I am so enthusiastic about your pursuit of said TEDx talk, and agree that that's something that really anybody can benefit from, just because it helps to teach them what their ideas really are about. And that is a huge step forward in getting them to the impact that they want.
Well, what you have just described is something you've helped me immensely with, as someone who can be flowery in especially the written language. It's just like get it down to its bare bones without missing its efficacy. And when you are able to communicate in that way, I think you can be, optimally effective and efficient.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah. I mean, that's my whole point is like, and I would say that people struggle at every level. People struggle with not actually understanding what their idea is, or why people struggle at the story level. Like, how do I talk about this in a way, or how do I make an argument for it that people will understand and respond to? And ultimately, I think we absolutely, like, the principles underneath it are undiscovered country. And so I think the folks that can figure that out, will absolutely have an immediate advantage over anybody who doesn't, because the level of clarity that you get for yourself and for your audiences by understanding your idea all the way through, from idea through story and argument through to the principles that it's about, means that you've got that tie rod through the whole thing, and you've got a really strong basis for creating that effect, that change in the world that you want to see.
Nice. Coming soon, either the tie rod or the principles underneath, or we're not sure yet.
Yeah, the three current concepts are kind of, in the Jonah Berger style of Contagious, something like galvanized, and then there would be a subtitle along the lines of how to build ideas for buy-in and galvanize people to act. You wouldn't repeat galvanized, but that kind of thing. Option number 1 is galvanized. Option number 2 is built for buy-in. That's kind of meant to sit as a nice little pair with made to stick. So if you've got made to stick, then this would be sit on the shelf right next to it, built for buy-in. And then the third one is a phrase that I have probably had quoted back to me more over the years than any other, and that is give them something they can't unhear. So I'm saying it's one of those three. So if anyone's got an opinion, please feel free to weigh in.
And cue the let's give them something to talk about.
Right.
All right. Thank you, Tamsen, so much for joining. I knew this would be fascinating and interesting, just like you. We have a series of lives coming up. So next is Tobias Sturrison next week, March 16th, I think at 11 a.m. Eastern, where we'll be talking about the Culture Challenge, which will be very cool. So I hope you're able to join us then. A big thank you again to Tamsen for joining us. And Walnut did it.
He did it. I would have to adjust I don't know if you can slightly, there's like a slight paw there right here. Like
a blurry paw.
Yes.
Yeah. Wonderful. Tamsen, thank you again.
My pleasure.
See you soon. And thanks all for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed.